Okay, please welcome to my left, Laura Stanfill. She's the author of Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary, also the publisher of Forest Avenue Press. Yay, I'm from Portland. And to my right, we have Michelle Ruiz-Keil. She's a writer and tarot reader with an eye for the enchanted and a way with animals. She's the author of All of Us with Wings and Summer in the City of Roses. Please welcome them.
Hello. Whoa, hello. I'm so excited to be here with Laura Stanfill. Laura is a friend of mine as well as a really important community member in our writing community. And we are just really happy to be able to be in conversation with each other. We actually haven't been able to do this since Laura's book came out. Her book, Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary, is a beautiful, magical story that's an intergenerational family story that, well, actually I should probably ask you to describe the Serenette makers and the whole situation there, but it's a wonderful book and I'm just really happy to be here talking with her.
Well, sure, I'll tell you a little bit about Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary. It's about a family who makes barrel organs in 19th century France, and the barrel organ they made was used to train canaries how to sing popular songs. Now, this was a real historic instrument. If you can imagine a little box that looks kind of like a music box, but it sounds like a piccolo or bird song mixed together, that's what a serenette sounds like. And when I was embarking on research for this book 15 years ago, I learned that people actually made these instruments and earned money from making them, and they would sell them to wealthy women in the United States who wanted to train their canaries how to sing songs like "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow," which made me really happy. Yeah, and also etudes or waltzes or whatever. And so I became enamored with the idea of a bird song and canary training as a metaphor. And 15 years later, I have a novel about a family, and it's whimsical and magical. And of course, we'll talk about that today. How about you, Michelle? Can you tell us about your books?
Yeah, so my first book is All of Us with the Wings. It is a coming-of-age story set in post-punk San Francisco about a 17-year-old who's on her own in the city and who becomes the nanny to the tween genius daughter of underground rock legends. So she comes to live with them in their beautiful Victorian house above the Haight-Ashbury, and she's kind of wants to just immerse herself in their world. But her past, which is a very painful and difficult one, is on her heels. And so, you know, as she kind of gets more into this world, becomes closer to all the family members, she also comes sort of face to face with the past that she has tried to leave behind. So there are also elements of magic and magic realism in my book. And it is a young adult book that I recommend for older teens and adults. Definitely not a book for younger teens. And my second book came out last summer, and the paperback just came out a couple of weeks ago. It is called Summer in the City of Roses. It is set in the early 90s Portland, and it is about a family of artists where the parents and the kids are very close. And, you know, as happens, I think, in happy families, there's a certain challenge when it comes time to for, you know, the kids in the family to become their own people and for them to differentiate themselves as they grow up. And so in this family, the balance is completely thrown off when the mom goes away for the whole summer for an artist residency. She's a choreographer, and dad is in charge. And he decides that his very sensitive young son would benefit from this wilderness boot camp program, not realizing exactly quite how harsh some of these programs can be. So sends his son there. His daughter becomes furious and sort of like runs off to find her brother, and the brother escapes from the camp. And so both of the brother and sister in the story are on their own in early 90s Portland, trying to find themselves and each other. And this book is a retelling of the fairy tale. It's a Grimm Brothers fairy tale called Brother and Sister, and then also has Greek mythology around Iphigenia and Orestes as well. So yeah.
I think Summer in the City of Roses and Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary, in addition to having magic in common, have that idea of a relatively happy family. I mean, they're not perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like, for sure, my character's family is not perfect, and same with yours, but they're trying really hard. And how do our characters find their way into the world and break away from that when there isn't deep trauma that they're running from?
Right.
And so I think they're both books about becoming.
Yeah, becoming and coming of age. And also I think it's interesting because in both of our books, the parents of the main characters feature in a kind of interesting way. Like with Laura's book, she kind of starts back a little bit generationally, and in my book, while we don't ever get into the point of view of the parents, their presence is there sort of through the experiences of their kids. So that sort of what they're bringing generationally in, working through sort of through the family and into their lives, is I think also a big part of it with both books.
For sure. And a lot of fairy tale type stories or children's stories in general often have absent parents, because then the kids can get into all sorts of adventures and trouble that ordinarily, if a parent had been sitting there saying no, they wouldn't have these adventures. And both of our books have that in common as well.
Yeah. And I think too, like when you think about, I was just talking to someone about absent mothers in fairy tales and why is that? Why is that the case? And in my book, the mother's absence is what sort of, triggers the tale. And I think that, that sort of, encompassing care and that sort of emotional connection when it's present, or often in fairy tales, a mother has actually died, or there's like a stepmother, the sort of bad mother. But what I think comes through stories like that is this sense of danger and possibility that go together. And I think that you can't really, I think about coming of age stories, and I think about stories that people, for instance, think would be, are good stories for youth, and young adults. And I think about the fact that having danger as a component, I do think is important. That's part of what we experience when we first, make choices on our own, and we need stories that talk about that too.
One of the things I've been thinking about with magic and fiction is that particular type of childhood magic. And I would say we're kind of surrounded by that, right? We're surrounded by play and joy and mushrooms and colors and just beauty everywhere we look here. And for me, wanting to recreate that idea of being a child and having that wonder on the page was part of why I added magic to my book. And I'm wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about the childhood magic in either of your books, or both.
Yeah. For me, I think it's kind of wonderful. As we said, magic, a beautiful being, came in with us to share the space. So for me, my way into magic is often through animals. In both of my books, there are really important animal characters that don't, that hold. It's interesting because when I tell certain people, like, oh yeah, my first book, there's a cat point of view character. He's not a talking cat that can talk to people, although, I mean, if people could understand, then, he would communicate with them. It's not his fault. But, it's sort of, they assume that there's sort of like almost even just like a lightness there. But I think what it really is, and it's a lot what we do as kids, it's just an expansion of what's already happening. So, I feel like a cat was someone in my first book who could hold parts of the city that humans couldn't hold. And I wanted certain things held by that character, and he was the perfect character to see through his eyes and to sort of lead us through almost like the back roads of the story to tell a more complete tale. And then with my second book, there was the dog Scout, who was also not a point of view character, but like a rescuer and a companion that held I think that actually, and formerly a street dog that held competency in a certain way, like the way that someone can become competent when they aren't cared for, and then are. So I don't know. I feel like for both of us, the magic just felt natural. It was like they were ready, kind of. I mean, I think for you, every time I talk to you or see you, like there's something magical going on. So I don't think it was a start. Like, do you think you could write something completely non-magical?
I have an answer to this question, and the answer is yes, absolutely, and it doesn't really work for me. I tried. I wrote 2 novels. My debut novel came out in April, and I wrote 2 novels before that. I've been writing my whole life. And my last 2 novels were very much grounded in the real world. I definitely had whimsical, quirky dialogue and a lot of metaphors and that sense of wonder on the page, but I was trying to write realistic fiction because I thought I was supposed to. I thought that would be what the industry would want, or that's what my agent wanted. As a book publisher, of course, I get to see the other side of that, but I hadn't quite gotten there yet as a publisher. I only became one 10 years ago, and this book was already underway. But yeah, those first 2 novels, I mean, oh my gosh, the sentences, friends, there were such great sentences in those books. But they didn't sell because I wasn't writing from a place of honoring my spirit. And because there wasn't magic in them. I grew up with music boxes, and I was an only child, and in my childhood bedroom there were automatons. I think there's an automaton booth here.
Oh my gosh.
And I measured myself every morning when I got up by looking at the glassy-eyed dolls in the cabinet next to my bed because I didn't have siblings, and they were just sitting there like, and if you pressed a button or cranked a crank, the automatons would start moving, and it was always very creepy. But to me, as an only child living in that bedroom, I was like, oh, well, my parents prize these. I guess I should be very quiet and very small and stay still. And so I think I can see why I wrote those first novels was because I was being very quiet and still, and I wasn't being me. And magic is there. I mean, I do write essays, but even my essays have a touch of magic in them. They just, a little sentence that kind of flips off the edge of reality and splashes somewhere you don't expect.
Right, and I know we were talking before, but the kind of, that's what people ask me too, like, why did you choose to write, magic realism? And I mean, partly is I do have a cultural connection to Latin American magical realism, but even without that, I come from a very assimilated and Americanized Mexican family, so, that wasn't like overtly present exactly, but it did sort of infuse things, and I just think I sort of kind of came out that way, like and so we were talking a little bit about how our sort of neurodivergencies might show up for us as writers, and I was thinking about how, like, let's say for instance you have like a very like I need to alphabetize some files or something, like that's going to be really hard for me to do. I have a pretty good organizational brain, but that's too boring for me. Like I can't do that. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about what works for me about being, especially the novel, which is like, some people are like, whoa, how do you do, it's big, it's like a lot. But for me, my brain works in webs and in connections, and I'm always looking for ways to connect things with one another. And I'm looking for I'm not looking for difference. I'm looking for, oh, this is like that, even though they seem very different. So I think for me, it's part and parcel, actually, of the kinds of stories I write, the kind of brain and the sort of way that I perceive the world kind of on every level, not just as a writer.
I love that idea of a web, and I feel like all of us who are writers, and who's a writer here? Anybody? Yeah. Hi, writers! Yay, thank you for coming. I feel like all of us as writers, when we're trying to create something, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we're using words, we're using sentences, we're using semicolons, or absolutely not using semicolons, depending on our personal preferences. And we're using these pieces to try to build this web of story that someone else can come into. And like I said, for fiction or nonfiction, when I write an essay, I definitely start not really knowing where my web is going to go. And a lot of the times my essays don't work either, but I just try again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny too, because I think that, I think that, like when Laura and I first met at a literary event, I think I could sort of tell just like from her energy that she was somebody that I wanted to know and to learn from. And as I got to know Laura and I saw that not only is she an amazing writer, she's also an editor. And I wonder how does it work for you? Because one thing that I couldn't do that Laura does really beautifully is she, writes books and she acquires, edits, and publishes books as well. Really lovely books. So how, Laura? How?
Well, for one thing, just to keep on with the theme of neurodivergence for a minute, I am highly motivated and I can do this whole laser focus kind of thing. And it can be really great for productivity. I'm the kind of writer who goes away on a week-long retreat and I come home with 150, 200 new pages.
Wow.
Because I don't go on walks like normal people. I don't stop for lunch. I don't, I go to the evening and we all talk about our work. And then I go back to my cabin and I write till midnight because I just have to get this story out. I have this time. And I have to say that focus doesn't always work that well when it comes to creating a piece of work because, for instance, with this novel, I had a lot of agents who were interested, and it would go something like this. The agent would say, I'd love to see the full manuscript, and I'd say, great, here it is. And then they would say, well, I love it, it's really cool, I've never seen anything like this, your characters are really neat, but could you change this or fix this? And I'd be like, I can fix it. And then I would go back and, do it, fix it. I mean, not over 2 weeks, but over a good chunk of time. And I would send it back out and they would be like, well, that wasn't what I meant. And then I did that a lot. And I think my perseverance and my focus and my obsession with getting it right kind of got in my way because sometimes the best creativity happens when you mess things up. So, and I have to say as an editor, if you're a copy editor or a proofreader, you really need to know how to make things look good on the page. But my superpower as a book publisher is in acquisitions and developmental editing. And developmental editing is like that big picture look. And so I go much more on my senses and my feelings, and a lot of the times when I'm writing to one of my authors, I'll be like, I don't know if this is just me, but I'm a little confused as to why you buried your mother behind your house. And then and my author was horrified actually because she was using metaphor and I took it
pretty far.
Seriously, yeah. And so she's like, what must you think I am that I buried my mother in my backyard? And I was like, well, you said that you looked out the backyard and there was your mother, but she meant the cemetery in the distance.
Yeah.
So, but developmental editing is a way I can get dreamy with other people's work too. And the playfulness and the freedom of really fusing, well, we all know as readers, right? When you read a book that really speaks to you, and you can fuse your thoughts and feelings into this other narrative and just be present with that person's joy or pain or life story if it's a memoir, it's really special. And so that's how I do it, is really one book at a time.
And also too, I really think that maybe you have a special way of holding space-time too, I'm pretty sure. But you don't have to tell all your secrets today.
I do. Sometimes I fold space-time and
I think you do, yes.
Also, I decide that my life doesn't have to be completely perfect all the time. So it is what it is, and I have stopped spending time beating myself up over stuff that I can't control or that maybe I could control, but hey, I've got a book to write, so.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really big part of it for me. It's like, what do you prioritize? Like, there's a sink full of dishes, and you haven't sat down to write today. And it's really, really hard for me to put the writing before the dishes. But but I've really learned to do it, and actually now I don't feel bad at all. It's like, because I think I've gotten really clear that, because when you're first writing a book, like, I don't know if any of you are trying to write a novel, but it feels like it's an endless process that could potentially go on forever. And especially with the first book, like I know yours did.
15 years.
Yeah, and mine, 10 years total, and with my first book, but then I wrote my second book in about 18 months, like kind of fully wrote. And so now that I understand, and then it is actually kind of a folding of space-time, but now that I understand like how much headspace and kind of the energetic space a novel takes up, I really get that, like, if I just get this out now and I just do this, there's always a downtime where you can do the dishes later. There's later. So,
well, it's like we build these rooms in our houses. I mean, whether or not you're writing a short story or a poem, you're building a space for this storyness. And if you fold up all your rooms and all your tents and take down all the decorations that you've put in your mind around all these rooms to go work on the dishes, and you come back, you're not going to remember where you hung that ribbon or how you put the whole thing together. So if you can hold space for that, and then also at some point eventually ask your child to do the dishes or do that. I mean, I'm looking at my husband over there asking my husband to do the dishes. Or you just get to your dishes when you do, and you just keep that little tent popped up in your brain so you hold your story with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a friend of mine, Julie Phillips, just wrote a book called "The Baby on the Fire Escape," the mind baby problem, and it's about artists who are mothers and about what that's like. And Laura and I both have kids. Mine are grown up, but they're still around a lot. And I think about that too. Like, I look at the artist mothers are kind of artists for mothers and what they did, and a lot of what they did honestly was just like not do a lot of stuff that people think we're supposed to do, because how can you do it? Like, I remember, I don't know if you've heard about, like, there's the author William Sawyer, and he had this amazing wife who supposedly loved to entertain, and he'd wake up at noon and go for a walk and come back and take a nap and do his writing, and then he'd come downstairs to this beautiful dinner party every night with all of these amazing and I'm like, wow, that sounds so great, but the world isn't like that. Like, I don't, my partner has their own life, I don't, so it's just funny thinking about, we have these ideals, I guess, of what it takes to be an artist and to have that space, and it has to look maybe like that or something. And I mean, the truth is, I mean, I know a lot of writers now, and we're all making those choices of, what are we not going to do so that we can do this other thing. Yeah, I feel like for me, it's really been worth it.
I'd say the same. I used to go out to everybody's events and take their pictures, and then I would spend 3 hours the next day going through 150 photos, choosing which photos I liked, doing the photo editing, and then tagging everybody on social media. And then I would do it again the next week. And I don't have the time. I don't have the space. I have the space for the people, but I try to choose how I use that. And usually it's talking to authors and readers and other publishers about how the industry works, because I can talk about that. And not everybody knows the backside of publishing, and I can share that. And that, to me, feels more important.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, there's a lot of choices, a lot of socializing that doesn't happen. And also I think, different writing disciplines also require different amounts of time too. I mean, I know that poets are in community a lot, and reading their work is a huge part of that community, which is super beautiful. And I think it's really hard with novelists because you kind of have to stop going out at night at a certain point. You just do. You cannot go and do all the things. So yeah, definitely, prioritizing that. And I think that by prioritizing it too, you are telling yourself something about the worth of your work, and about you're giving yourself permission to make work and to take that work seriously. You know what I'm saying?
so much of the time we fold up around our rejections, or we fold up around the fact that we didn't write that day, or that someone else won a prize, or got a publishing contract, or sold a poem, or didn't sell a poem, just got accepted for publication. And I think a lot of being a writer and keeping going is remembering that these are external pieces that don't reflect on your work or your voice or the story you have to tell. It's about just keeping going as a writer. That's what it's about, not trying to measure yourself against everybody else.
Which is hard. It's hard. It's really hard. There's always something else. You know what I mean? Like, one thing I noticed was that a lot of my resistance will come up around stuff like that, where it's like, oh, your book didn't get chosen for a thing, or something, that did not happen. And again, I think it's about, well, we all have that imposter syndrome. We think of an artist as this like elevated person, that's unreachable or whatever. And I mean, now it's like I've met some of my literary idols now, and we're all just people, and their dishes aren't done either, at all. So yeah, but that stuff's hard. The imposter syndrome, I think, can stop us at every stage. I was shocked to find out that one of my literary idols and mentors gets really, really sad, like if her book doesn't come out on like the best of the year list or whatever. Like it still bothers her. Like she says, it really still takes her an afternoon, and to work it through. And I thought, wow, I really thought she'd just be over it now, because she's gotten so many accolades. But she's like, no, there's still that moment where it's like you're so vulnerable, and you want validation, and then you have to go through the whole cycle again of like, do I need the validation? Do I not? So yeah, another really good thing for writers is therapy, because it's really hard. But it's definitely an ego workout, like you really have to get clear about what's important, what you're doing it, who you're doing it for, how will you measure success. My friend asked me that. My friend who's a poet said, how will you measure success? Yeah. And I was like, because I was being so externally focused. And I had to really think about that.
I start my debut authors, especially when we're onboarding, I ask them, well, what do you want your life to look like as a writer? Like for me, I can't think of anything better than this moment right here. Being at the Oregon Country Fair and getting to talk to Michelle. This is how I want to measure my debut novel. I don't want to measure it by whatever royalties come in my next check. It's not what I want. One of my friends died of COVID in April 2020, and we were part of a trio, and the other person in our trio sent me a picture of herself holding my book. And I was like, all right, I want to measure my success as a writer by this friend taking the time to send me this picture. Yeah. And if we can come up with those measurements instead of external ones, I think it's easier to get back to the work. My friend is 80 years old, and her debut novel is coming out next year, and she just loves the work.
Is it Diane?
It's Diane.
Diane Greenwood. Watch out for her. She's got 2 books coming out.
Yeah, she has been on fire. And you know what? She loves the work, and she keeps coming back to it. And rejections or accolades or sales or whatever, it's not about that. It's just she's got stories to tell.
I can't believe that's her age. For one thing, I feel like also the other thing art does is it really lights you up. I feel like it because you're giving time to the things that you love and bring you joy. You're giving time to your fascinations, to your obsessions. And I think that paying that kind of self-attention, for me, it gives me more room for my family. Like sometimes I just cannot cook dinner another night, I'm just like, oh. But if I've had a good writing afternoon, I come out of it and I'm like, oh, you people, you're adorable. I love you. I would like to make you food. It really, really changes what I have to give, giving myself that space. It's not like it doesn't add up. Like it's larger than the sum of its parts, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I would say too, writing books or stories with magical components reminds us to see the magic in the everyday.
Yes.
And to make those like split-second connections that feel magical or special, or beauty seeking, joy finding. picking up a shiny rock and when you're walking
Yeah.
the dog, because you have to walk the dog, but hey, look, here's a shiny rock.
That's right.
I just feel like doing that kind of writing helps us center that experience in the rest of our days.
Absolutely. It's good for noticing. You know,
Yeah.
you start to become more and more and more of a noticer. It was funny, I was talking earlier today with someone about writing, and I was talking about how when I had knee surgery, I went and I did rehab with someone who was a Pilates instructor, and she was someone who used wild metaphors for like the body and what's happening in the body. Like, because you know, there's some things she'd be like, move like this, and I'd be like, my body doesn't know what that means. I don't know what you're talking about. And she'd be like, okay, imagine that like you're a marionette and I am the puppet master. Like, there's this whole elaborate stories, or just really weird things like there's a basket in your middle, or like, I don't know. And I never, all of a sudden, it was like my writing became so visceral because I realized, oh, I can tell stories about the experience that's happening in the body. So instead of being like, oh, she cried, or oh, she, you know, she thought, oh my gosh, my characters sigh a lot at first. It gets cut, but yeah, they're sighing, they're nodding, they're, you know, all sorts of things. But
I like to nod too.
oh yeah, nodding, yeah. But like, I started to realize, oh, like so I guess what I'm saying is that pretty soon everything in your life will start to feed the work too, and then it won't feel quite as separate also. So yeah. We have so many writers here. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or thoughts or like creative conundrums or anything. Yes. So the question is, do we work with a plan, or do we just kind of go with the flow? Is that right? Or do we or like an outline or something? Is that what you mean? Like, do we plan it in advance? What do you do, Laura?
Well, I've done both. I actually wrote an amazing plan in advance. I took a hero's journey workshop for this book, singing lessons for the Stylish Canary, and I mapped out my story, and I was so excited. And then I sat down to write it and realized if I wrote the entire book, it would probably be 800 pages,
Oh my God.
maybe 1,000 pages. What I thought was going to be the final third of the book was sort of a whole other novel, so I lopped that off, and then I wrote the first 2/3 and made that the ending. And then I had a very wise editor say, I love your book, but it's 2 books. And I was like, still? I got rid of that 3rd book. And so I lopped off the second half of my book and wrote a new ending, and that's when it sold. So I did write a plan, and I stuck with it to some degree, but I ended up having to winnow it down, and I think that's a marker of my inexperience as a novelist, thinking that I wanted to put a lot of plot into this book, because I used to write really quiet literary fiction, and I was like, this one's gonna have plot, it's gonna be great, and then I planned out too much plot.
I hear you.
But for the new book that I finished recently and I'm revising, I did kind of have a plan, and I sat with that plan for about 5 years while I was working on this other book. And I wrote it really fast. I wrote it because we got a dog during the pandemic, and the dog really likes to sit on my lap. And so to let the dog sleep on my lap meant I could have my little laptop here, and suddenly I wrote a book in a lot faster than 15 years, like my first one. How about you?
Thank you to Waffles.
Yes.
Let's shout out Waffles right now. Waffles! Actually, I mean, the dogs are important. My dog Stella passed in November, but she was with me all the way through writing both of these books, and I definitely recommend pets can do a lot of work for you. My German Shepherd really felt like it was her job to write with me. So for me though, with the planning versus in the writing world, sometimes they call it like planner versus pantser, like seat of your pantser. I always think like I have a lot of funny thoughts when I think of being a pantser, but I kind of am that in a way. So what I do usually is my first book, I just had the bare bones of an idea. Actually, my first book, I really didn't mean to write a book, but my kids are going to a free school in Portland, and at such schools, a person can do whatever they want to do. And so at that particular school, the teenagers came up and said, hey, we want to do this thing called NaNoWriMo. Do you guys know does anyone know what NaNoWriMo is? National Novel Writing Month, right? It's this thing that happens every November where a bunch of, just nutty people will decide, I'm going to write 50,000 words of a novel. I'm going to write 50,000 words in the month of November. And once you got that 50,000, you're almost home free, Another 20, 30,000 words, you're there. Your novel's done. So they said, I had been a playwright, and so they said, well, will you help us? Will you do, kind of like be the coordinator for our group or whatever? And honestly, like what it really meant was, will you let us have sleepovers at your house and will you buy us pizza? And the answer was yes. And I said, okay, but if I do it, you have to do it because I'm really busy. So let's all do this. And so we did. And as I wrote it, I fell in love with writing novels, but I didn't know what to do. So I tried to follow it through to the end, and I got super duper stuck. And what I did, I work a lot with, I'm very interested in Jungian psychology, and I work a lot with fairy tale and myth. So, and I tried to map the hero's journey with it, but it wasn't working. Later, I discovered an amazing book that I highly recommend called The Virgin's Promise by Kim Hudson. And it is an alternative to the hero's journey that works really well for a story that isn't like sort of a big hero journey, but that's more an internal sort of coming of age process. So once I discovered that, it was quite helpful. And then I asked myself, what story is this? What am I trying to tell? And I realized that there's a very intense story called The Maiden Without Hands. It's a grim fairy tale. And I realized that's the story I'm telling. I'm telling a story about trauma and healing. And once I understood the kind of story I was talking about, I saw what important beats were in that fairy tale, and I used that as my map. So I used a fairy tale map I superimposed over what I already had. And so with my second book, I knew it was overtly a fairy tale retelling with some elements of Greek myth that I wanted to get in as well. And so it sort of had its own map. So it was weird because I knew how it had to end. I knew what was going to happen. But it was really challenging writing toward that end. I've also, so for me, like the map, it helps, but it actually, I can't really do it. It doesn't quite work for me. But then kind of halfway through, it's like going somewhere and you think you know where you're going, then you have to pull over and ask for directions. It's like that. So halfway through, I do start to point.
That's a great metaphor.
That's what happened to me coming here. Actually, I put Oregon Country Fair in my my like Google Maps, and I didn't look at the destination because it seemed to have steps. So I went, and then I realized all of a sudden it like didn't show. It like got me off the freeway, but didn't show me where to go after that. So then I went and pulled over and rechecked.
Mapped it out.
Happens in real life too. Yes. I don't write every day. I don't know about you, Laura. I don't write every day. I find now that I'm understanding that there are cycles, especially with publishing. So I know now that I'm drafting. So what I'm writing is a draft. I recently needed to kind of go back and perfect some of my draft. But there's drafting, and that has to happen. For me, I do well going away. Like you said, I write very well when I'm away from home. So a lot of times I'll do a huge chunk when I'm away. Artist residencies are your friend. But yeah, I can't really, I wish I wrote every day, but I don't. In a day.
One sitting a day or multiple sittings a day for writing?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm away at a residency, it's multiple. It's like I'll get up in the morning and I'll read what I did and maybe kind of lightly edit. I'll have breakfast, I'll come back. So it's really, honestly, almost all, like you said, Laura, it's like just, I can get really tunneled. At home, usually at home, I can only get in one sitting, honestly. Yeah.
I think I'm usually a multiple sittings a day person, and some of that is because I have a workaholic laser focus, and if I get into a piece of writing in the morning and I carry it around through picking kids up at school or doing the dishes if they must be done, I have something going on in here, and usually even if I don't get another writing session in during the day, I'll be jotting things down, or I'll be thinking about what tomorrow's gonna look like. And it kind of depends too on what project I'm working on. I've found myself recently working on a couple projects. I actually have 3 ongoing right now. And so I think if I worked on one of them in the morning, I would definitely not flip to another project. I would just stick with that and follow whatever the threads were from the morning through.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to read what I wrote during the day right before bed, hoping that I'll dream about it, or just, it almost like solidifies it or something. I think that's really nice. Yeah. Any other questions or creative dilemmas or thoughts?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Believability in fiction is something we talk about, right? Because we're creating a story from scratch. But when you add magical elements to your fiction, it becomes an even more complicated question. And I'm curious about, you could talk a little bit about your process or how you approach that. And I'll say that I'm asking this question because in earlier iterations of my novel, I threw in a whole lot of magic and just hoped that something would work, and I ended up having to cut a lot of it and streamline what I was doing because it was top heavy. It just couldn't hold up itself. So I'm curious about...
Yeah. Okay. I actually do have an answer for this. So for believability, it's back to that body thing from the Pilates teacher. So what I try to do with there's sort of light, slight magical realism, like something that you'd encounter at a place like this, for instance, on a daily basis or whatever. That's kind of prepping the story. But oftentimes when I'm getting into the real heart of the story, it can't be expressed really through like realistic fiction, but I want it to have an emotional resonance that is true. So I really I breathe into it. I think it's physical. So I was an actor before I was a writer, and I think back to the way that you have to kind of open up your body conduit, let the story kind of come in and then let it come out again. That's, to me, that's kind of the way that I would work with something as an actor, right? And so I think that when I'm trying to tell something that's magical, it has to have that physical feeling of veracity. And I can't explain how to get that, but I think that you can feel it when you're writing it, and then it's the stuff that and then it just feels right. So it has a truth, even though it doesn't have, maybe the physics don't match with our understanding of physics in our daily lives, but it has an emotional truth. Can you say more about that? Because it's ephemeral, that.
Well, I like that a lot. One of my characters starts to believe he can heal the dead in my novel, and he really wants to believe this of himself because his father has a magical legend about him, and he thinks, well, to be worthy of my father, who is known as the Sunbringer, I have to be special too. And so he kind of convinces, he's not sure for a while, and then he kind of convinces himself he does have this power. And I leave it a little bit ambivalent because I wanted to get to the emotional truth of childhood and how we approach who we want to be and what we think we can do in the world. And how sometimes to external pressures or wanting to please our parents or wanting to fit into the society that we're born in, how those pieces come together and kind of mess with our emotional truths. And so I think that was yours is a good one.
I really love that you mentioned that, because I was thinking about that aspect of your book. Like, now that you mention it, I was really glad that I thought, okay, now I wondered, is that going to become his thing now, and the book is going to be about like how he can do that? But I really love the fact that it seemed like perhaps he could do it once or twice, but not always, and not forever, which I think is really cool, because there are times in your life where you're just sort of like magic in a certain way, and then you're not. And so to me, that actually added that gave it truth to me, that it wasn't always in it, because there wasn't, it's not like it's a magic system that this person discovered the rules of.
Right.
Yeah.
And it sort of, I broke it, right? I wrote it just to break it, kind of.
Yeah.
But to me, as somebody who has a lot of anxiety, I felt like I've always struggled with believing in myself, and so my character does too. And in my head, when he believes in himself and he believes he can do it, he could do it. But when he's not sure and he cuts himself down, it doesn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's not anywhere in the book. That's just how I was approaching it because of how I see things. I remember my very first public reading was many years ago, and it was at an old Grange hall out in Estacada, Oregon. Have you ever been there?
I haven't.
Okay, it's just this very old Grange hall, and my mentors invited me to read, and I was so scared and I was so nervous, and they were like, "Oh, Laura, you're gonna be so quiet, you're gonna have to really project because there are no microphones." Well, I got up there and I was like, okay, nobody, this is my anxiety speaking, but I decided nobody anywhere in my life will ever invite me to read or speak anywhere again unless I nail this one passage. Well, of course that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I told myself I had to do it or else. So I'm up there and I'm sharing my work. It's never been published. I've never been published. And I feel like this is it. This is the core of my literary experience. And as I'm up there, my necklace falls off and goes down my dress. And I kept going, and I just kind of sneaked it back out and kept going, and I ended it, and years later I was still going to that event, and people remembered that reading, and they did not remember my necklace falling into my dress. They just remembered my characters. They wanted to know if my book was ever published. And I see that moment of self-actualization where I was like, darn it, I've got to be great or I will never have an opportunity ever, ever, ever again, which of course was not true.
It's so funny. I feel like that's part of like that, I don't know, that imposter syndrome, because I know I keep having that sense too. It's like, okay, the door's open, but it's only open right now. You should run through it, do all the things, you know. But I think hopefully with time, that's lessening for me, but it's still a thing for sure.
I definitely, when I founded a publishing company 10 years ago now, and I thought about the doors opening and closing as a metaphor. When I got my first agent, my mentor told me I had a foot in the door, and I was like, no, I'm in the door. I have a gatekeeper, and she loves my work. But then my novels didn't sell. And then when I started my press, I thought of it like rooms, and I thought, okay, well, they're the cool people in the room, right? And their doors closed, and they have all the power, and people read their work, and everybody knows their names. But I can decentralize the power structure. I can do just I can do my own thing over here and see how it goes. And people showed up to our first event. We had 120 people show up, and I was like, I don't know everybody in this room. What's happening? And it was like that manifesting magic in the real world. And since then we've published, I don't know, 20, I'm looking at you like you know. I don't know, more than 20 books. And I still have that sense of magic about creating a space outside of the power structure. And now, of course, the people in the room know my name and they talk to me. And I just like to hold the door open for everybody else, because I'm like, I can get this door open. I know, because I know some agents, I know publishers, and I just kind of muscle my way in there and hold the door open. I don't want to be in the room. I just want to hold open the door so the people who need to get in there, especially the underrepresented voices, can find their way in and hopefully get their voices heard.
Yeah, and I feel like that's happening too. That's really happening with those books for sure. Yeah, it's interesting as an artist when you go to put your work out and you're interfacing with this whole structure. That is, it's pretty challenging at times. So there's a lot of so important to have presses and people who are willing to do that work and to decentralize the power, like you're saying. Because it's just getting more and more centralized, actually. Yeah. There used to be like 5 big publishers in the United States, and now there's 4. They keep consolidating.
Yeah, I think being a publisher and knowing I could do good things for other people's work and muscle my way in that door so that I could hold it open for other people. At some point I decided, well, I'm good at this, I must not be a writer. and I was working with a business coach, but it could have very well, I mean, she's one of my dearest friends now, but yeah, you don't know the story. I had put my writing down. I was like, I had 2 novels that I wrote, I spent years on these, and they didn't sell. And I have this other novel that I'm working on, and it's still here, and it hasn't found a home yet, and I want to revise some more, but why would I spend time on my work when I could spend time on this person's work, and this person's work, and this person's work? And I decided that that was super fulfilling, and I learned a whole lot. And then my friend Nicole was like, I was doing this whole business strategy thing with her, and she said, imagine a big tower, and at the top of the tower is where you want to be, and what's it going to look like? And I was like, telling her all about my dreams for the press and what I wanted to do for other writers, and I finally said, and then when I get my novel published. And Nicole was like, hold up, Laura, what do you mean when you get your novel published? Is that your dream? And I remember feeling so much shame fled through my body. I curled up into like a little pill bug, and I was like, maybe? And Nicole was like, no, it's okay. You haven't, like, she immediately knew. I thought I was wasting her time because I put all my eggs into this publishing thing, and that's what we were there for. And she's like, no, this is great. We can work with this, but let's get your writing up into the top of the tower. And so I got back to work. And then I started publishing essays, and I've had really good luck with essays coming out. And then I sold my novel, and now I have these other projects going. And my bio is like a gazillion lines long because Nicole said, put your writing up there. And so I wanted to, it's exciting to be a publisher and to help other people, but I feel like a lot of my fuel comes from being in a room by myself with my laptop and Waffles the dog on my lap. And then I write.
Yeah.
And then I can go out and do the outside stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Totally. I'm really glad you didn't give up. I'm really glad that Nicole told you to put it up there. Yeah, it's really easy for us to find a million reasons why not, But what if you just did it, though? What if you just did that work? And eventually you'll have something. You'll have something there that continues to feed you as well as other people, hopefully, too. Does anyone else have any other questions? We're almost done here. I think we've got a few more minutes. Questions, thoughts? Yes. No, gosh, no, of course not. What?
What age group?
Oh, what age group? My books are for older teens and adults. My next book will be for adults. My first book is definitely for older teens. I would say it's a 16 and up on the back of the book, and I think that's about right. My second, Summer in the City of Roses, can kind of be 14, 15 up. But yeah, a lot of my readers are adults, as I have found, though. But I also have some youth readers as well that I am super grateful for.
And I write for adults, but my protagonist is 19 by the end of the book. So I think, it's a whimsical, uplifting, hope-filled world that I've created. So I feel like teenagers who are looking for a good fantasy read or just to dive into a book and feel good might like it too. So, but primarily adults. That's how it's been marketed.
Yeah, definitely.
Great question.
Yeah. Any other questions? Creative conundrums? Thank you so. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I'm having trouble hearing you. Would you want to come closer? Would that be okay? Okay, I really want to hear what you're saying. You need to go. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's asking about, often she writes 300 to 500 words, and it's great, and then she keeps going, and it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel good.
Oh, you're saying that you write short pieces that feel complete?
Oh, okay.
Right.
Short story.
And so I can have one here, one there,
Yeah.
one there. Like, you can go on a streak of a couple.
Right.
And then
Uh-huh.
And I have a hard time continuing to do that because I start measuring myself against it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think sometimes too that the well can get dry though too. I've had that feeling too, where I have nothing, And there's a great book by Martha Graham. Darn it. No, not Martha Graham. Gosh, I'm not gonna think of her name. She's a dancer. Twyla Tharp, who writes a really great book about artistic practice, but she has a lot of thought about after something's finished, how you get stuck and you feel like you're never going to do it again. And she just talks about ways to fill your artistic well. Go to the museum, go for walks, read, watch good films, like whatever it is that fills you up. Because I think you're just telling yourself, hey, I just need I need a break. Yeah.
Sometimes I get stuck like that after I've written a piece of my novel and I don't know what to do next. And if I keep reading that piece, it's a lot harder for me to write the next piece. But if I go out and take a walk, or if I start working on an essay and I come back, my well is filled, and I know I'm no longer measuring what the next 5 words are going to be compared to this amazing chunk I just wrote. So we wear ourselves out. We do. So if you want to talk or say hi, and also if you would like to buy a book and have them signed, our lovely friend back here is holding up books, and you can just go, it's right around the corner right here, right? Yeah, and we'll be there if you'd like to buy a book and would like us to sign it. And thank you so much for coming and listening and talking about writing with us. And this is one of our dreams, would be to do an event together, and especially here at this amazing place. So thanks for being a part of one of our dreams, our writer dreams coming true. Thank you all.